for inviting us and for your nice words. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yeah, we just need to get it to full screen and we'll be on board.
Okay, is it working right now?
Yeah, but it just needs to have the full screen. Go to the bottom right and then hit
But
the.
it's not working because I have already done it.
The bottom right, if you just.
Okay, I'm going to try it
there's-
again. Let's see, I'm going to try. Is it working now?
No, so can you hit the bottom right? No. To get a full screen.
Yes, I'm so sorry about this.
Try one more.
Well,
Let's see. Let's see. Now?
Oh,
Yes.
right. There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting us to the Metro vignettes. I'm Eugenia Vidal. I'm the head of the Open Space Planning Office at the Green Infrastructure Service of the Metropolitan Area of Barcelona. This is really a long title, so I totally understand that it's very difficult to remember, but I think the important thing here is that we are the metropolitan area of Barcelona, the public administration that encompasses 36 municipalities. That's it, Barcelona plus 35 more. And first, we thought that we need to define what do we mean by metropolitan. For us, the metropolis entails new urban form. It's not only a question of scale. Metropolises are urban agglomerations with strong social, economic, environmental interdependencies that need to be managed in an integrated way. And the main differences between the all modern city are the coexistence of different centers, the increase of mobility, and very important, I think, for today's topic, is the replacement of the concept of the traditional city with the notion of territory. And I'm going to insist on this on the presentation. In the case of the metropolitan area of Barcelona, the metropolis is a territorial, social, demographic, environmental entity that was created during the last century as the result of the growth and interconnection of different urban systems around the city of Barcelona. And today we have a territory of 636 square kilometers with a population of 3.3 million inhabitants. This means that it's a quite dense territory. But nevertheless, more than half of the territory corresponds to open spaces, the coastal range, the Llobregat Delta, the Besòs River, the metropolitan beaches, and so on. Most of these spaces are protected, and they are complemented by a myriad of urban green spaces as well. And altogether, they conform our green infrastructure that is one of our main key assets. So in relation to heritage, it's very important to realize that we don't have direct competences or power to protect our heritage. Nevertheless, heritage is a very important element and aspect of the kind of actions that we carry on with the help of the help and collaboration with the 36 municipalities. And with this vision for a green metropolis and the importance given to the green infrastructure, we tend to focus on natural cultural systems that explains even if partially our particular idiosyncrasy. And there are three aspects I would like to emphasize in relation to our approach towards heritage. That's the metropolitan narrative, the focus on cultural and natural systems, and the link between heritage and sustainable development. I think that all three aspects are very familiar to the Heritopolis family. In our case, this metropolitan approach, it's a kind of novelty since the competences and the work done till now, it's mostly from a national and from a municipal point of view. And then the natural cultural concern and holistic approach, it's again another novelty, since most of the figures and laws and documents refer to each of them separately. There are only a few more kind of landscape documents that help us to work in a more integral manner. And even in those cases, we tend to talk about cultural landscapes and natural landscapes. And we pay attention to different issues with these split categories. And then very, very important as well is the relationship between heritage and sustainable development. There's a clear link between these two concepts for three reasons. We understand heritage as a legacy that we want to identify, preserve, and transmit. Then there's this relationship between economy and heritage as well. Given the importance that heritage has in tourism activities and dynamizing the local economy. And then in third place, there's this relationship with this new culture of the territory that we would like to reinforce, where instead of developing new areas, we are reusing already existing structures. This is the approach, but what kind of work do we do if we don't have direct power or competences to protect our own heritage? Well, as I mentioned before, heritage is a very central part of our work. There are different departments involved, and we play a kind of a strategic and coordinating role within our municipalities. And then since we assist them with different aspects, one of them being planning, which is very relevant to heritage protection, we do many actions. And for today's presentation, I have selected 4 examples that cover different kind of work, from research, projects, planning, and then a last example that touches on dissemination. The first example has to do with the research done on the historical roads and paths of the metropolis. Here we see a topic that is very relevant to the definition of the metropolis that I gave at the beginning. For us, this is a metropolitan heritage, even if it predates the formation of the metropolis itself. With this research, we have been able to identify and geolocate the Roman roads, the medieval paths, and the historical roads. And this research has been incorporated into the future metropolitan master plan that is currently under the process of being approved. It has helped us to identify which local heritage has a metropolitan dimension added, and it helped us to establish an overall reflection of the heritage of the metropolis. The second example is the research conducted in the Llobregat River. Metropolitan rivers have played many functions and roles during history. In this case, we have major transport access, we have a water supply infrastructure, an irrigation infrastructure, and energy supply infrastructure as well. And these different functions and roles has created a lot of artifacts that are of high interest. At the same time, the river is an infrastructure, an ecological infrastructure that helps to improve the ecological connectivity, the biodiversity, and then it plays an important social role as well. And many years ago, we wanted to have a heritage inventory of the river prior to major works that were done to build a high-speed train. And this inventory is very interesting. It dates back from 2003 and already had this comprehensive and integral approach that I was talking before. Here with the red circle, I have point the church or crypt of Colonia Güell. That was designed and built by Antoni Gaudí, and it's one of the UNESCO sites within the metropolitan area of Barcelona. Colonia Güell is one of these industrial towns that were built in proximity to the river. And as an example of the kind of work that we do, we did the inventory, we did research, and now recently in 2022, we designed and built these cyclist and pedestrian paths that connect the train station with the crypt and with the landscape itineraries along the river, reinforcing the experience of the river and improving this heritage network that the river offers. And another example, again in a strategic open space of the metropolis, this is the Serra da Collserola Natural Park. Here, AMB, together with other administrations, we draft the new protection plan for the Serra da Collserola, that it's an 8,000 hectare protected area of forest and farmland at the heart of the metropolitan area. The plan was a mixed plan. It was urban and environmental and tackled on many different issues, one of them being historical heritage. And here the efforts, the focus was on how to establish synergies between the protection of this heritage and the management of the park in a way that would improve biodiversity and the ecosystem services provision. And there are many, many different strategies in this sense, but today I picked the Vallvidrera reservoir that you can see on the screen. This reservoir was built in the 19th century. It's very small reservoir, but it's very interesting to see the relationship between the built elements and the environment, and how they influence each other, how the reservoir evolved and had different uses. From its origin as a water infrastructure, from its function as a scenic attraction in the park, its abandonment, and its recent value as a biodiversity hotspot in the park. And there are different proposals to preserve this space, but all of them they are done with a three-side approach that takes into account the high architectural and landscape quality of the setting, then the values and functions that this water space perform in this park, and then to understand that it's a major social destination as well. And the last example has to do with the creation, this is very recent, the creation of the Metropolitan Heritage Network. This network is based on two previous projects that were partially funded by the European Union. And here we had the collaboration as well of the different municipalities. Right now, the Metropolitan Network has 11 elements that belong to two different projects. One that was focusing on cultural and industrial heritage, and another that was focusing on metropolitan parks of high heritage value. This is an image of one of the works that we carry out in relation to the cultural and industrial heritage. It was interesting that this program gave priority to those structures that were related to rivers and pre-industrial canals, as this mill that had been rehabilitated and now functions as a public library and hosts some public facilities to support the local economy. So it's always this effort to go beyond the rehabilitation of a single building, but to think more on the social, environmental, and economic impact, and to think in terms of system and network. And similarly, the other program focused on the metropolitan parks, and here the aim, of course, is to facilitate the leisure of the population, the social cohesion, but as well the environmental awareness. And what I think is interesting as well, not to show this range of different actions and activities, is the work to revitalize these areas and to disseminate the values of this heritage. This belongs to the same Metropolitan Heritage Network. Here we have created a new specific web page where you can find different podcasts that recreates the history of this heritage with some experiential stories. And then we have programmed some activities on site. These activities are discovery activities and guided tours and so on. And well, to sum up, I would like to insist on this idea of an integral and comprehensive approach, and on being coherent with the character and nature of what a metropolis is, especially on the intermingle of what's the open spaces and the urban areas of the metropolis. Thank you very much.
That was a beautiful vignette. I'd just perhaps anybody would like to put something in the chat or raise their hand. I'd like to consider one of the problems that we have in a metropolitan area is that we encompass an enormous variety of different people in different places of different societies. How do they, in fact, identify themselves in a single network? Are there also sub-themes, networks, like modern heritage obviously is a critical one for Barcelona, or industrial heritage, or something else which could relate to it? Is there something which could also then relate it to the individual communities where they can find something which is special for them rather than one which belongs to Barcelona?
Well, I think this is a very interesting discussion. For us, it's always the understanding what's metropolitan heritage and what would be more local or municipal heritage. And I think that heritage is mostly local, but then there's this metropolitan awareness, and we tend to focus on more backbone structures and not so much about communities that we feel that they are already covered by the municipalities themselves. But for us, it's especially interesting to be part of Heritopolis because I think it's one of the few places where you can reflect on these issues and have this kind of discussions.
Anybody else would like to make any comment on the proposal? I think that one of the things for me is really critical for Heritopolis is spatial sustainability, and I think that is probably the most important aspect of it, as opposed to the accepted temporal sustainability over time with generations, but spatial sustainability which the metropolis can afford. So I think we really need to try to get our heads around how the governance of the individual municipalities and their own particular identities within what we then define as metropolitan heritage. I know that Antonella has got a lot to say about this.
See, sorry, I cannot find the rising hand. Ciao, Eugenia. Nice to see you. For me, right now, what is relevant is to try to metabolize your presentation, because I think that probably is one of the first time in which we touch really what does it mean metropolitan heritage. The feeling that I had, try to define a sort of definition right now after your presentation, is that metropolitan heritage is an infrastructure. So is a tool or is a infrastructure that allow us to bring some values so that we can define a metropolitan citizenship. So my feeling is that there isn't a real awareness regarding the need of the metropolitan level. And that lack is due to the fact that there isn't really a perception and awareness regarding some values that the metropolitan dimension can brings and implement. So metropolis heritage as an infrastructure that communicate values, first of all, to define a metropolitan citizenship. But also, it seems to me that your project identify also the heritage, the metropolitan heritage as a network. And so we look at the need of the local scale, but from another level that allow us to define a network of local point that allow us also to demonstrate that the metropolitan dimension is able to act differently and better than the local level. Because I was in Brussels a few weeks ago, and the discussion with the Regio department was help me to negotiate a budget for the metropolitan level. And your approach that is related to a network of local places that can show the need of a metropolitan budget is fundamental. I only have one remark when you quote the functional space. I really think that we have to discuss about this concept that also is really supported by UN Habitat, but many other multilateral use this way to look at the territory, a functional geography, even though I think that is exactly the cultural and Eritopolis approach that allow us to change this idea that we have to look the territory only in the metropolitan territory only from a functional point of view. There is a symbolical point of view, a cultural point of view, and probably your example could help us to move forward this definition. So thank you very much.
Yeah. I think that the defining of a metropolis is because of that, exactly picking up what Antonella said, is that it is a series of different borders. So it's the environmental metropolis might be different than the health metropolis, and might be something other about the commuting metropolis, and so many different things. I think it's a matter then of then beginning to understand exactly how these layers come together and weighting them into it's rather than an edge of a metropolis by some sort of transport sign saying built up area, but it's something more than frayed edges. Olivier.
Yes, thank you. Eugene, I love the presentation, and I think you presented something along these lines, or at least a part of this last year, which I really loved in terms of this concept of trying to put the nature, culture, landscapes together at the service of the metropolitan area. Just to add to what Antonella had already said about the networking function and the connectedness that you create across these two polities, I'm wondering whether we can reflect, or it's useful to reflect on the now very common agenda of the nature-based solutions that looks at networking so-called green infrastructure with a very functional dimension to it, at a broader scale, let's say at a metropolitan scale, for the sake of stronger, more resilient ecosystem services, and of course, in the maps that you showed, especially the initial map, which showed the green I don't know whether you label them as corridors, so on, but does exactly that, and whether leaning into this other agenda strengthens some of the attempt to do a culture nature landscape mapping, and whether telling the Commission that these two are usefully joined together might be one of the things that Antonella can bring back to the Regions Committee search for a better, because of course the EU has a strong agenda for ecosystem services and the protection of biodiversity. Biodiversity is declining massively, and cities are, to me, somewhat extraordinary reasons, they have become important areas for the protection of biodiversity. So something that was very counterintuitive until 10 years ago. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, but David's not here, but I know he presented the whole agenda of the nature of cities as national parks, and whether
we have Anastasia here, which I'd like to also welcome and congratulate her for addition in her family, and that is and she might be able to say something about Birmingham afterwards in the same spirit. Yes, Olivia, over to you again. Continue.
No, that's it. I was just mentioning these two things that came to mind that can somehow support or expand or add multi dimensions to the intent, let's say.
Okay.
Hi everyone, and thank you.
So just to say that I think it picks up also on Linda's presentation of Hong Kong, and that really sort of resonates about it, and it does highlight and strengthen the importance about what we're doing, and we need to sort of perhaps at the end of the year looking at all these vignettes and then be able to distill from this something which is really an important statement. Okay, before we move on to New York, Anastasia.
Hi everyone, and thank you for the warm welcome. I'm very happy to be back. I've just been back from maternity leave, so I'm not gonna comment very far of where you are on the Heritopolis idea, because I need to do a bit of catch up. But obviously, I'm gonna start rejoining the meetings now, and I just want to say, we are still very much interested and very much part of the group. And Catherine Moore, she also just makes sure that I mentioned she just couldn't attend today's meeting because she's presenting actually at the moment in BCU, and she has missed a few meetings because of other commitments or teaching commitments, but we are very happy to be part of this group. In terms of the West Midlands National Park, it has started, or the momentum continues, if I may say. We had some really good collaborations and outcomes from the UN Habitat, the Urban Thinkers Campus last year, and also Catherine is in touch with the other areas of UN Habitat, but we're also working together in the ILC, the International Landscape Convention, with IFLA. I'm still the chair of the emerging professionals for IFLA, so we want to bring all that into this group as well. And in terms of the national park approach or idea, I don't want to take lots of time, but I just want to say that what we're doing really is we're proposing a new concept for cities or regions. It's not that very traditional national park idea, especially the one we have in the UK. So what we are doing and what we're proposing to collaborators is a different vision for how their cities how they would want their cities or regions to look like in the future. I don't know, Mike, if that's what you want me to explain, or
we'll have an opportunity. We're going to have Birmingham on the radar screen, so get prepared.
Okay, very happy to do so. Really nice to see you all, and
we need a photograph of the new addition to Heritopolis.
Okay, I'll do that, of course.
Okay, so thanks so much, and let's move over to New York. We're the other side of the ocean. So Moses, over to you. I think the best thing is you can also say who you are and what you do, and I think it's I always know that I know myself the longest period, so I think it's easier that way. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Moses Gates. I'm Vice President for Housing and Regional Planning At Regional Plan Association, we're an NGO, we're a nonprofit, non-governmental civic organization that does planning of all stripes and all subject fields, not just in New York City, but across the entire New York metropolitan region. We're not an academic institution, we're a civic institution and more of a think tank, but we have a lot of academic crossover, and many people teach and do other research. So we have a really large research report. It's going to be featured in the New York Times sometime next week on our coming climate crisis and our ability to meet its effect on our housing needs and other needs in the New York region. So I wanted to kind of preview that with this group here. This is not public yet. We're not going to release it until next week. So please no talking to the press or anything like that. And I would love to hear any kind of comments or thoughts, because it's 99% final, but it's not quite final. I'm very excited to be back. Just the the time difference is difficult for me to make these meetings sometimes, but I love this group and this organization and its mission, and I really hope to be a little bit more involved. So with that, let me share my screen here. Let me try to get it up. There we go. So we have a tentative title, which is called Averting Crisis and Zoning for the Coming Climate Challenge here in New York. And almost more than any other city in the United States, we're going to be facing serious flood hazards in New York City. And, lots of people compare us around the world with your Londons, your Parises, maybe your Sao Paulos. But our most analogous cities are archipelagos on river deltas. We're talking your Mumbai's, your Tokyo's, your Jakarta's, places with a lot of coastline and a real inability to build serious flood barriers, because we're river deltas and we would end up backing up those rivers. And we are going to be facing serious flood hazards and climate hazards, not just in 100 years or 50 years, but really in 20 years. This is looking at 15 years, kind of our flood hazards in 15 years. And it's a significant amount of our coastline, and not just our coastline. We have significant amounts of riverine flooding and also pluvial flooding, which is not really even accounted for in here. Just flooding that is going to end up backing up the sewer system. And what we found is we have a very fractured land use regime here, both in the United States and especially in the northeastern United States and in New York. We have over 700 municipalities in our greater region, of which New York City is one. And outside of New York City, in Westchester County and Long Island, which is where we are studying this particular phenomenon, almost 4 out of 5 of these municipalities are going to lose at least some housing to this flooding effect. So our risk projections are on kind of a worst case scenario. On the high end, 1.6 million people, 1 million jobs, and about 82,000 housing units are going to be about 82,000 units are going to be lost. About 1.6 million people and 1 million jobs will have at least some kind of flood exposure going forward. And this is not just about housing and jobs. As we do our planning at Regional Plan Association, we think a lot in terms of a little more bread and butter kind of things, housing, jobs, transportation connections. And it's really good to have this organization to talk a little bit more about the more intangible aspects of a city and a region and the heritage of a region and how that's at risk also. Places like Coney Island are heavily exposed to flooding. This is from 13 years ago in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. Even Times Square, you can see on the bottom right, has some flood risk. And our infrastructure, especially our subway, is hugely at risk also. So this is not just about jobs and housing. It's about the kind of city we have here in New York, one in which we have a lot of culture, a lot of attractions, a lot of heritage, and a lot of mass transit infrastructure that enables us to visit all of that. But this is not just an urban problem. In terms of jobs, it's mainly the urban core, and we're talking essentially Manhattan, the very dense parts of Brooklyn and Queens that are at risk. But residentially, it's increasingly the suburbs, Long Island, Westchester, that are also at risk. And you can see here the difference between the people and the jobs that are exposed, potentially exposed to flooding by 2040. And when you get to the housing loss and what's likely to be lost, it really is mostly Long Island. We kind of saw that map before, and it's the coastal Long Island that is most at risk. And I'll explain why that is more of a problem than other places being at risk as we go forward. So what does this mean for New York? Well, unfortunately, New York and the entire New York region already has a terrible housing crunch. We have over 100,000 people in this study area that are living in temporary emergency shelter, which is essentially means they're homeless. We have severe overcrowding and we have an extremely low vacancy rate. So we have a really big current housing shortage, about 362,000 units. And then exacerbating that, we're still a huge jobs hub. We, even in the wake of our current federal administration, we're still a significant both domestic and international migratory hub. And people are still having kids in New York and in the United States. We're forming households at a rate that's well above a lot of the other kind of richer Western metropolises. And exacerbating that household formation and is the flood loss. And those are also future housing needs that we're going to have. So our current housing needs are significant, but our future housing needs, even just in 15 years, are even more. We're having an aging population, which are smaller family sizes, which need more units. There's a lot of reasons why we're going to have this big housing crunch. And the flood loss not only is a direct loss of 82,000 units, it also limits where you're able to build more housing in the future, which further compounds the problem. So we looked at this by county. We also looked at it by municipality, and it is an across the board kind of problem. There's some there's some places that are going to have a little more housing need than others, but it is pretty uniformly distributed. And when you look at the current needs and what's needed to meet these needs, it's really the vacancy rates and the overcrowding that is driving a lot of our current needs. And you can kind of look at it in spatial formation here. New York City is the biggest, has the biggest current housing need, mostly because it has the most overcrowding and the biggest homeless population in the region. But if you look at prospective needs, the story really changes. You can see a lot of household formation, but flood loss in Nassau and Suffolk County, which are the two counties of Long Island, that is not a majority, but a very significant minority of the housing need we're going to have on Long Island. And if you look at these prospective needs, now you see the suburbs kind of start to have a lot more of this housing need in the future. So yes, the current crunch is mostly in New York City today, but that future crunch is increasingly going to be throughout the region. And this is a problem because we do not have the legal capacity to build enough housing to meet these housing needs. In the United States, and especially in kind of the northeastern United States and New York State in particular, we have very, very strict local control of land use. We don't really have any state requirements for building housing like many other places have, much less federal requirements. Each small little municipality is able to control its own land use, and generally speaking, they don't like building stuff. There really is a paradigm where locals don't like new construction. They don't like new housing. They think it adds expenses through additional school children, or adds impacts through traffic. It is, I assume, similar many places around the world. And as a result, many of these municipalities, especially on Long Island, have restricted the ability to build housing. And we did a practical build out of how much housing is allowed under current zoning, and it's less than half of our need for new housing that we're going to have. So we really need to change our land use laws, and we really need to change our ability to build housing, not even in a way in which we need to invest in infrastructure improvements, although we do. There's some places where the sewer capacity might not be there. But we just need to change our laws, just the legal ability to be able to build housing in many of these places. And this is because especially the suburbs restrict any type of multifamily housing. This is where buildings of 4 units or more are allowed throughout the study area. And you can see it's, pretty much everywhere in Brooklyn, Bronx, most of Manhattan. And the parts of Manhattan that don't allow 4+ unit residential construction are going to be kind of commercial industrial districts. But once you get into some of Queens and Long Island and Westchester, it's extremely few and far between where multifamily housing is allowed. In terms of the amount of residential zoning districts that allow multifamily housing, it ranges between 2% to 5% in the suburbs. And so from this, we come out with the deficit. We come out with how much housing a municipality is going to need versus how much they currently allow through their zoning. And it's significant. Again, in New York City, the numbers pop a little more because New York City has the most current need and is kind of the largest numerically in terms of population in the region. But if you look at the ratio, how much housing as a ratio is needed versus allowed, this is where especially the Nassau County, kind of the close-in suburb to New York, demonstrates that they have by far the most restrictive zoning in the region. I should mention, when you look at New York City, you see that it's divided up. It's not just one city. It's divided up into 59 different areas. Those are an informal geographic division in New York called community districts. They have no legal power. They're not like, say, boroughs in London or anything like that, where they have their own government or legal power. They're essentially used just for geographic nuance in New York, and a little bit in terms of advisory powers on land use. We just wanted to make New York City have a little more detail. So what do we do about this? This is the big question across the board. And a lot of times when we're talking about different problems in urban areas, whether that's our climate problem and our housing problem, whether that's our need for historical preservation and heritage preservation, or our need to grow more infrastructure and jobs. We always tend to present these as either ors, as opposed. We can solve our climate crisis by retreating and adapting, or we can solve our housing crisis by building. We can solve our heritage by preserving neighborhoods, or we can solve our need to grow by tearing them down and building them. And this is something that we really don't think is true, and we really want to try to find other ways to address these crises together. Because if we do nothing, if we have complete inaction, we are addressing neither one, not our housing crisis, not our climate crisis. And so, we think we can also do the inverse. We can take proactive, positive steps and address both of these at once. And in order to do this, we're kind of looking at the different types of areas that are at risk or not at risk, and areas that we think are well suited to grow, have good access to jobs and transit, versus ones that maybe aren't. And you can kind of see, we divided the region up into half-mile square parcels and kind of assigned them these different typologies. And I should say this is something we've really been informed from a lot of the other cities' approach to this around the world in terms of trying to figure out recommendations. Paris especially, where there's assigned housing targets and housing that needs to be built for municipalities, but there's a limited area that they're allowed to build in, so that the housing ends up dense and transit oriented and more urban. Those are the kind of things that we took a look at around the world as different policies to try to encourage housing growth that also meets our climate and adaptation needs. So we came up with these kind of 4 different typologies and developed 4 different playbooks for them. And in smart growth havens, places with high growth potential near jobs and transit, and not a lot of housing risk, this is where we really need to focus on meeting our, not just the local housing needs, but our regional housing needs, and turning maybe suburbs into urban areas and downtowns. And we have a lot of places that are high growth and high risk. Downtown Manhattan is the biggest example of this. Downtown Manhattan is at very high flood risk, but is also the kind of place where you're not doing buyout programs, you're not retreating, is probably the most important business district in the United States, if not much of the world. So this is where we want to invest in resilient technology and adaptation measures. These are the places where that investment in resiliency is going to be most needed. And if we're going to do that investment, we can also probably have additional growth in those areas. And in terms of bang for your buck, in terms of dollar of resiliency infrastructure we need to invest in for jobs and population and heritage that we protect, these are the places to do it. In low growth, high risk areas, places not near jobs and transit, in the floodplain, this is where we need to look at buyouts and land acquisition and retreat. And then there's also places that, are on high ground but are just kind of far out there, and not places that are really well suited to huge density. And these are places that either, need the least amount of investment, both in terms of resiliency and housing and infrastructure, but might need a little bit of support, might need some encouragement to build a little bit more sustainably. And also are places that we might look to really improve transit access. Are there places like this where we could do an infill rail station and turn them from a low growth area into a potentially high growth area? And so those are, that's kind of how we're looking at the region and our recommendations for going forward to try to meet our housing and our climate crises here. And that's the end.
Right. Well, if I were always saying is that the city is more than a group of buildings, and the metropolis is more than a big city. New York is more than more than the metropolis. So, I mean, you've presented us a massive issue. I would like to try to relate to one or two aspects of it. First of all, is what is the loss of open space, which would be effective to actually deal with this? And what could be then the role of natural heritage and in this open space in supporting this housing? And I think you highlighted it very much about then the relationship. It's not a binary situation between the housing and the heritage. And exactly this is what 11.4, the target of the goal 11, it is in fact using heritage safeguarding heritage to make our cities resilient. In other words, that is in fact exactly where it is. So the role of natural heritage is very, very important. I've come across then a new concept which has been adopted by IUCN. It's called, I put it in the chat, it's OECMs. So normally we have sort of a very binary things about nature reserves and things like that. IUCN have come up with something else called other effective area-based conservation measures. I don't know whether it's going to be a very useful thing, but nevertheless it is there. And it tries to look at these large open space, which are part and parcel of our sustainable development. In other words, all these extra people are going to need activities, or going to be using activities which heritage can provide so as to make them sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and safe. So that really is my sort of tuppence halfpenny worth on looking at that. And you've also highlighted the second part of it is then you've highlighted the issue of governance, which is really critical. I mean, Heritopolis is together with in the format of UN Habitat with the Metro Hub, and that deals essentially with governance. And I think that how in fact we can actually deal with the difference of governance in such wide, diverse situations. There's no one system is going to work, and it's going to then it's your gut feeling about how in fact you're going to then have encourage the municipalities to go a little bit more than the single unit single family units. Anyway, these are my thoughts. If anybody would like to sort of add to that, and then give opportunity to Moses to react. Any more? Yes, Linda. Yeah, that I was waiting for Hong Kong to come onto that.
Very interesting presentation.
Well, you're a bit weak.
Is it better now?
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation, both presentations actually, but two hats, Los Angeles hat and Hong Kong hat. I'm a little bit worried when we try to address housing costs, focusing on numbers, and I understand this is not a focus on numbers, how we lose sight of the other qualities that are required for a livable space. So Hong Kong is very efficient in creating housing, addressing housing needs, but the result and transportation and everything on paper is very efficient. But when you're living in this space, the space is not what we would normally call livable. It's a difficult space to navigate. So, and then in Los Angeles, the densification of certain areas made sense on paper, but really in transportation, it didn't make sense. There was just incredible traffic. So I'm curious to know how in this scenarios that you've developed, you've balanced, you know, green space, heritage, and the other aspects of livability while we're increasing, we're, you know, providing housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me try to go through all 3 points, and I'm also going to share my screen again in a little bit for just a second. I'll start with your points on kind of a more holistic approach to housing. I would say a few things. In terms of infrastructure impacts, you know, that we have a gigantic amount of underutilized rail infrastructure in the New York metropolitan region, you know, much more than Los Angeles. And we recently instituted congestion pricing in Manhattan, which has been very successful. And what it's kind of showed us is, to a large extent, the driving is a choice in the New York metro region, to a much larger extent than in somewhere like Los Angeles or more suburban typologies. So in terms of the traffic effects, you know, that we are a little concerned about it, but we think that we have such underutilized mass transit in the suburbs that's something that we're able to really adjust for well, and also with demand side interventions like congestion pricing. In terms of I also am a little worried about the housing quality issue, especially since many of the zoning reforms we put in place in New York now are essentially to be able to build smaller apartments. And, you know, I have been to Hong Kong, and I've been in Hong Kong apartments, and, you know, they're fun for 2 days, and I wouldn't want to live there for much longer. It is, you know, and it is a balance. And it's the kind of thing where right now our minimum apartment size in New York City is 600, no, it's 480 square feet, mostly across the board. To some extent, because we're having smaller household sizes and older household sizes, it maybe makes a little sense, but I agree it's something we need to kind of keep a bit of an eye on. And I think we can do that by expanding you know, not necessarily expanding the need for private open space, but we can do it by, you know, building higher, larger buildings with more, you know, private indoor space, and investing in our communal outdoor space, which kind of gets me to Michael's point. I mean, first on governance, this is like full stop a governance issue. We have a ridiculous land use regime in New York State. And we have tried very hard legislatively to give the state a stronger hand in determining land use on the municipal level. We've passed, I would say, some modest reforms in New York State to encourage more housing growth, or sorry, New York City to encourage more housing growth. But the state, the politics just are very difficult. I'm convinced that the only way forward is essentially a judicial solution, is to bring certain lawsuits on the basis of the New York State Constitution and fair housing law. But it's a long road. But it's very difficult to make work politically. So I'm gonna share my screen quickly and give you a concept that we developed here in the 4th regional plan, which was done 8 years ago at this point. So right here in the middle of the screen is the New Jersey Meadowlands. If you look at the right of your screen, you'll see Manhattan. And the Meadowlands are kind of there's some parks and wetlands. There's a lot of industry, like a lot of warehousing. There's a small airport in there. And it's the kind of place that is very susceptible to flooding. It's, you know, some places are only 1 foot above sea level rise. It's the confluence of 2 rivers. It's kind of like right at the mouth of the river delta. And so what we did in the 4th plan is we looked at how we can kind of turn that more into a park that expands with nature. And as sea levels rise, how do we make it into kind of a living park? And that would not just allow us to absorb a lot of that effect of sea level rise, but would also add a real open space amenity to the people in the region as well. You know, it's kind of right in the middle of the region. it's it has a lot of interesting natural habitats, and so transitioning that from low intensity uses that are flood prone into a real regional and urban asset is the kind of thing we're looking at that I think fits really well with what you were talking about.
Mhm. Okay. Is there I see there's a comment from Vera. Vera, do you want to?
Yes, thank you for presentation, also the proposal. At least I'm talking about something that happens really in Brazil. I would ask Moses if the
Mhm.
plan may increase land use at least close to the park, and may it cause gentrification in this proposal. I'm very curious to understand that.
I mean, I think the answer is I don't know, but the further answer is, it's not the plan that's causing the increase in land costs and gentrification. It's nature that's causing the increase in land costs and gentrification. If we lose 10% of our residential land to climate effects, that's a real squeeze on the rest of it. And that's, it's not only direct displacement from those flood prone areas, but you do have the effect of a more constrained housing market, higher rising land costs, higher rising housing costs, and more displacement that way. I think our approach is to try to relieve the pressure on that by loosening the zoning envelope. And, I agree that housing affordability and housing costs is not just a numbers game. And, I think that especially income inequality plays the largest role in dictating housing costs. But as kind of planners and as local and regional planners, global income inequality is the kind of thing I personally and our organization has a lot less say in than land use regulations. So we tend to concentrate on how we can adjust those to increase the housing supply and hopefully, take the pressure off of our costs and gentrification.
I saw Antonella waving. I don't know whether that was it was just saying hello to me or that she would like to say something.
I don't know where it's possible to raise a hand. So I make like this and something is working. But Hi, Moses.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I remember your first intervention in Eritopolis, and you said something that for me was really inspiring because you start your presentation saying what makes New York, New York. And since we work in an area close to Jamaica Station toward the airport, and I remember that it was a flooded area, and speaking with the people that live there, and with our colleagues in New York Institute of Technology, they introduced the fact that for Americans to move, to be displaced, was not so relevant because they used to move their houses, even though in that neighborhood it was, for us, was really characterized by people migrating from India with specific also symbols of their life and traditions. So if we think about the connection between land use, affordable housing, and tradition in America, how we can deal with this displacement of the people in case of flood. And that is the first question. The second question is related to nature-based solution and the sponge park approach. Is really, technically speaking, is the solution that every environmental engineer propose in this case. My question is about how to define a sponge park solution that really could characterize a place in terms of culture, because okay, I am from Europe, and the symbolical meaning of a public space sometimes cannot be compared to the meaning of a sponge park that is also in our drawings absolutely the same everywhere. So how we can merge the nature-based solution and cultural-based solution to produce a landscape-based solution that really help us to characterize our territory. And finally, in terms of governance in Europe, or particularly in Italy, we are discussing about the constraint of insurance for the people that live in risk area. That for me is another case of injustice. So our government didn't provide any solution regarding the risk, but constrained citizens to pay for an insurance to protect themselves. That is absolutely absurd, I
So
guess.
let me I'll just give the last word to Moses. I'd just like to say one thing. What would have happened if you'd made the same presentation but flipped the slides, started with the slide which you ended with, started with the floodplain, and then speak about the housing? How would that have then affected all our reactions to exactly what would be done? My second one is then also relating into governance, is that the drama of difference between planning, which is through tort in America, as opposed to the rights of the planner in Europe, is dramatically different. The rights of doing good or the rights of preventing bad, yet the result might look the same at the end. So it's quite unusual. But you have the last word, Moses.
I will try to address all of that. I mean, it's a lot of really good and interesting points. You know, I would say the biggest thing in terms of how do we deal with flooding and displacement and migration in a just way? You know, in the New York region, about half of the people own their own homes and about half of the people rent. And the difference in how people are going to need to migrate and move is enormous. Homeowners have a significant amount of wealth and a significant amount of political power, much more than renters. And so a lot of the ideas of moving, buyout solutions, you know, buying people's homes in the floodplains at market prices, and then they have enough money to move somewhere and be okay. You know, these are the things that are being discussed, but nobody is talking about how to deal with renters, and you know, especially folks without wealth in their homes or other wealth. And I think this is the big question we need to grapple with. We have pretty advanced ideas and even actual programs in place for homeowners, but we have nothing for renters. We have nothing for public housing residents. We have nothing for you know, any kind of other subsidized housing programs. And so this is something that we're really dedicated to trying to think of and to work on, is how do we narrow that gap in a just transition between homeowners and renters. And I also thank you for remembering the kind of what makes New York New York question. It was you know, I am, you know, a very passionate about New York City, and I would say that, you know, making sure that people aren't involuntarily displaced or having a just transition in reaction to that is a big thing. But one of the biggest things that makes New York New York is its ability to welcome people. You know, it's ability to welcome new residents, new communities, its ability to have people visit, which is increasingly difficult. It's increasingly difficult to build hotels here. And you know, even just visiting is expensive, like very expensive for folks now. And I think when you see the World Cup in 2026, the combination of the expense and also the federal government's attitude towards towards international travel, I think it's going to be a very big story. And so it's not just that need to preserve our communities and preserve our folks. We also need to adjust and build so that we can continue to be the kind of city we've always been, which is the kind of city that welcomes new communities, welcomes new migrants, is continually has that energy of the new. And that's another thing I'm really concerned about. I really like that idea of like, how do we make these climate, the climate parks or the new kind of open spaces we're going to have to adjust a real place and not just, oh, it's climate park A and climate park B and, things like that. And how do we adjust that to our actual natural heritage? In New York, you talked about working near the airport, and Jamaica Bay is a very signature place in the New York City imagination. When we think of going to Coney Island, that's near there. When we think of taking the train to the beach, which is a very kind of like New York thing, it's the beach on the other side of Jamaica Bay. So I think that Jamaica Bay is really the place, and we're constantly adding to the open space around it. We recently took an old landfill and added it and made it into a park. That's on Jamaica Bay. It really is the place where we have the most relationship to nature and to water-based nature, and is it's maybe not somewhere that a first-time visitor to New York would go or even maybe hear about, but it is large in New Yorkers' imagination. And so that's the kind of place I think could serve as a really interesting and good test case for like, how do we, if we can make Jamaica Bay into a real place that responds to the heritage and built environment in New York City, I think, we can use that to kind of scale up the other ones. Mike, I feel like I didn't address one of your points, but I might leave it there.
That's great. Anyway, thank you very much. I think it was really amazing having these two parts. As in, we're going to leave to our secretariat in Korea to try to work out how to package this and put this on to make this available. Because I think the discussion, we're having a series of metropolises. And next time, Mo, I think that you just missed we lost you when having to discuss exactly some of the issues which I think Lagos would also relate to. But anyway, that'll be for the next time. So let me quickly go. We've just really got 5 minutes left, but let me quickly go for some of the other points on the agenda, because I think they're all quite important. First of all, the publications. Working Papers Volume 2 is in publication. So everybody who was involved in writing or in presenting last year's research forum, it will be published very shortly as Working Papers 2 of Heritopolis under the banner of UN Habitat, the Metro Hub. The Built Heritage, the special edition, is moving ahead, and it is the final chapters have been accepted, and it's being planned for December of this year to be published. So we're looking forward to that. The book option, we're going to have to wait for Francesco to be able to come back and speak about. There is now an option of Heritage and Society to put out a book on which will look at Heritopolis. So that is 3. 4, the mainstreaming. UN Habitat have come up with, there's what's called national urban policies. Every country has a national urban policy, and they're under the banner of Heritopolis that they've prepared mainstreaming heritage in the UN Habitat national urban policies. So Wendy, who is not here, she prepared already a draft which focuses essentially Africa. We need the first round, Antonella, David, and myself reviewed, but there's something very important. This would like to go on global. So we want to be able to say, what are the recommendations for mainstreaming heritage cultural and natural, in the UN Habitat National Urban Policy. This is an opportunity for us to be involved and to give input at the global level, and the door is open for us. So I'm asking really for volunteers or for groups of people, whether it is like a group in Birmingham, or a group in Barcelona, or a group in Prague, or wherever, whether you'd like to take on board and look at this, or even see exactly how it could be then taken another regional approach. The new Heritopolis survey, I'll give a few words to Klaus Petter to speak in a minute. The events is that we have then the Heritopolis, which is the Latin American Caribbean chapter, actually having a big event, which will be Heritopolis Beyond Conflict in Rio. And there's also then UN Habitat Learn. There's a learning format, and again, Heritopolis has been invited to participate. So for the last one, I just asked to give Klaus Petter to update us. The idea is that we had a survey, we opened up a survey. One of the things that we would like to suggest is a new survey on heritage and metropolis, and we thought that we would like to ask people in the consortium what subjects are they interested in trying to get more information on a global scale. So whether it is something on even on the role of botanical gardens, so I'm looking at Olivia, or whether it is the role of sustainable housing, looking at Mo and relating to heritage, we would then try to put together then the next global survey, which would then reflect on some of the issues which the members of the consortium are trying to address. And so therefore, this is a great opportunity if you're looking at something, well, I really need more information from on a global scale, which would help me to strengthen where I'd like to be. This is your place where you can actually say something. Klaus Petter, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. On the last meeting of the consortium, we got David and me. We were asked to give a proposal for the second global survey, including potential new baselines and information. And I wrote, there are very many questions, and Mike put some questions just now, and so it's really a difficult task. I wrote a small paper about this with with introduction and contents, and also with the next steps. And this small paper could be added to the minutes. Well, it's a Heritopolis Steering Committee meeting in December. Mike proposed concluding a second Heritopolis Global Survey with the aim to gather data on heritage, focusing on the localization of the SDGs from the 22 Heritopolis metropolitan members. This is a question is also to be discussed. Do these 22 Heritopolis metropolitan members or other ones? But I think it should be like this. And David, he is not here. That's that's a really question. We were asked to help prepare the survey questions, building on the previous survey, on the first one. And also Monica, in a meeting, she said she would help us. And of course, the associate from David, Ken, he would also help us. And in our last consortium meeting, we were questioned to develop a more focused format for the next global survey, possibly concentrating on sustainable and climate resilient management of World Heritage sites and cities. So this is something different. It's not the metropolitan cities, but World Heritage sites. We have to discuss this, of course. And what are new to the contents? What are new potential baselines? And this is a question what Mike just raised, and this is really a big question, which is not solved now.
I think that we will put it added to the minutes, so I think that people will have the opportunity of seeing exactly the text. As I said, that this is it's top down and bottom up, is that there's a great interest in from UN Habitat to actually have this information, and perhaps I think it should come bottom up as well. It says what information is really being needed in the cities and regarding heritage, whether it is localization, whether it is in fact tourism, whether it is then added values of heritage. All this is going to be part and parcel of where we are going to go after the next Sustainable Development Goals after 2030. So you can put it in the chat before we close, or you can actually come on board whenever you feel. You can just send me email and it'll be just fine. So that's our last point. Is there any other comments, any other requests? Just yeah.
I just would add, Mike, that's a very good proposal that people who are interested on this topic could write to you and give their thoughts.
Vera.
Just to inform that we are going to plan our meeting in Rio between the end of October and beginning of November. But we will have a special meeting next week. It would be today, but I mean, we have all meetings in the university. But we will have next Wednesday, we're gonna have the meeting for deciding the dates and also title, the access, the call for papers, for abstracts. Okay.
Fantastic. Okay then. So thank you very much, and thank you so much to Eugenia and Moses for sharing their insights into New York and Barcelona. And we'll see you again next month. And for those who are celebrating the Eid this next week, we wish everybody a good holiday, and also a good holiday for Passover. So we are multicultural.
Thank you.